Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Lackawanna Pastimes feature. This week, since it's NEPA Gives Day, we'll be looking at ourselves. We're focusing this week on some of the research resources we have available at the Lackawanna Historical Society, and also talking about some of the favorite stories that we've uncovered in our research for ourselves or for genealogists. We're joined by Executive Director Marianne Moran-Sabakinis, who'll be talking about what we have in our library and in our collections, and then I will be talking about some of our favorite stories, not including murderers and thieves that we have uncovered in our research. So Marianne, I will turn it over to you to talk about what we have in our library.
Thank you, Sarah. I am happy to take it away. So Sarah and I were talking about how this was going to run today, and Sarah said, well, why don't you do the usual show and tell that we do live and in person, and then Sarah will be happy to share some of her more exciting finds as she's been doing research. And I said, oh, that's a good idea. And then I thought, ooh, show and tell. How am I going to do that on Zoom? So I brought things out. As you can see, this is the show and tell part of it. And I quickly realized it's going to be difficult for you to really see what I'm showing you and appreciate it. So now it's just background. But what I'm going to do is run through what we like to call research resources within the collection. So if someone came in, we would hand them a brochure, or we would tell them the types of things they can find here at the Lackawanna Historical Society. So usually the person that comes in is researching family history. So we start with the genealogy files in the collection. They are arranged alphabetically by surname, very simple, very easy. I tried to count them the other day to figure out how many surnames we have actually created in the many, many years that we've been collecting them. I just estimated, I counted one drawer's worth. There was about 187 file folders in one drawer. There's 12 drawers in there. So I figured I could say there's 200 per drawer. So there's probably 2,400 and up of surnames. So you might come in, perhaps Delita could come in and find a folder for the Waltons, or Jim Rimpson could come in and find a folder for the Rimpsons. Not necessarily much in some of the folders. You might just find one clipping. And sometimes it is, it's a little tiny piece, a little birth announcement or a wedding announcement. But Sarah pointed out one of her favorite in our files is the Clark family file, which is a very thick file. And that's the big piece that is behind me, which is this large piece here. And I did not scan that to put into a PowerPoint, but that is, if I kind of move some things out of the way, it's a tree. It's a drawing of a tree. And at the very top of the tree, you can see the names of Deacon William Clark and his wife, Mary Gardner. And then as you come down the tree, each branch is one of their 9 children. And then each branch springs out into their descendants. So that's kind of a nice artistic piece to show you genealogy, and you don't see that in every file. But what you will see in most files is a family history chart or a written description of the family, starting with the earliest and then going through the descendants, a little biography, bits and pieces. And then sometimes you get a newspaper clipping or a wedding certificate. It really depends on the file you pick up. And at this point, I am going to screen share because I just want to get you a closer look at what we do have to offer. And let me just find the screen I want to share. Okay, can everybody see it?
Not yet, but it's coming.
Okay, tell me when it's there.
Oh, there it is. Now you're good.
Okay. What do I hit for this slideshow? Just begin slideshow, right? Okay, so what I wanted to share with you was this one clipping. This is also from the Clark file. And this is a lovely story about a couple that were celebrating their 70th wedding anniversary. And I just love the pictures because the pictures show you them dating in 1912, and then it shows them on their wedding day, and then it shows them on their 70th wedding anniversary. So that's an extra special piece of genealogy history, I think, because it has not just the photographs through the years, but it also relates a little bit about the family. And this is Mr. and Mrs. Leroy Clark. Mrs. Clark was the former Gladys Dietz, but Mr. Clark's uncle was Truman Ed Clark, and he was married to Ella. And if you put Ed and Ella together, you come up with Adela, which is a road in Clark Summit that was named for them. And I kind of thought that was a fun piece of history, so I put that in. Okay. We also have in our collection a photograph collection, and the photos offer a variety of information. George, I did put the Suburban Railway shot in for you. That's an iconic scene of Scranton Suburban Railway's first trolley run, the reason we're called the Electric City. So you have photos that tell you about certain important parts of history. And if you look on that, that's a scene of the corner of Wyoming and Spruce. So down the street in the background, you see St. Peter's Cathedral. So you can learn a lot from one photo. The other photo that you see on the right is Adams Avenue. It's the 300 block of Adams Avenue. And it's a picture of Old Town Hall. That's that little building that you see on the right. Old Town Hall was a popular dance spot where people hung out and socialized. That building is no longer standing. And in this block and that location would be where the Geneva Apartments currently stand. So it's a residential for the elderly kind of place. Okay, in our photo collection, we also have portraits. So the man on the left, I don't know if anybody knows this gentleman, but his name is Patrick Blewett, B-L-E or B-L-E-W-I-T-T. The Blewetts until a few years ago probably weren't discussed that much, but last year quite a bit, because Patrick Blewett would be the great-great-grandfather of President Biden. And of course, we don't have a historic photo of Joe Biden's childhood home, but we do have this rendering of a painting that was done by Austin Burke. So in addition to photos, we have prints of things like this painting. So we also have published books in the collection, and this book is one of my favorites. This is Hollister's History of Lackawanna Valley. This one was published in 1885. You can see it's the 5th edition. This is one of the earliest references we have to know what Lackawanna County and the northeastern Pennsylvania, Wyoming Valley, how it developed. And in that book is this engraving of Slocum Hollow that you probably have seen a lot of at any historic presentation. If we talk about Scranton history, we usually show this illustration, but it was actually part of Hollister's history of the Wyoming Valley. So if you come in to use the books in the library, you can search them through the Albright Libraries database. All of our books are put onto that database, so it is searchable by title. But there's a variety of books in our library that range from local histories like this one, as well as genealogies that are published. I put in the Slick family history because I like the name Slick, from 1892 to 1992. We have town histories. There's the Borough of Oliphant's Centennial Edition. And we also have organizational and business histories like Elm Park Historical Sketches. So there's a variety of topics covered within our library, and that is a searchable database that makes finding these things a little bit easier. Now, we also have in our library city directories, and we talk a lot about Scranton city directories, but what people may not realize is we have county directories, just 3. We have 1888, 89, 1893, and 1899. So these are pages from each of those directories, and it lists each town within the county outside of Scranton and who lived there. So I pulled these 3 pages because I thought they were a little unique. Taylorville became Taylor, Priceburg became Dixon City, and Winton actually became Jessup later. So there is a Winton section, but at one time Jessup was called Winton. So those are kind of some of the interesting things that you might find in our library, in addition to the city directory of Scranton. The city directories for Scranton start as early as 1859. These 2 pages, which you can tell were back in front and I copied them and they show through. They're from the 1867 directory, and that directory includes a full history of the city of Scranton, as well as Providence, Dunmore, Waverly, and Humphreysville. And then one of our favorite pieces that we often refer to is this ad for Peter Kohler, the shoemaker, who was very well known because he made shoes for President Lincoln. So that was kind of his claim to fame. Now, in addition to our library books and our photos and our genealogy files, we do have some wonderful archives, more manuscript collection pieces. We've talked a little about in the past about Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western payroll company records. And we have the prison records, which you see here. We also have the James Archibald papers, which I'll talk about in a minute, Scranton family business records, letter books by the Scranton families. So there's a lot within our archive collection that can tell you some really great information if you're looking for history. I just copied this one prison record that we had displayed for an exhibit once and realized that Andrew Wargo and Rosie Latis actually live at the same address, 620 Clearview. He was arrested for fornication and she was arrested for adultery and abandonment. So kind of interesting. I couldn't find anything in the newspapers about them, but there's always an interesting story if you look at the prison records. So we do have, we kind of get excited when people ask us to search the prison records because you get a good story out of them. Another thing I just mentioned was the James Archibald papers, and this happened recently during COVID. A woman from Norway who is working on her PhD in linguistic studies, specifically of British women who were living in other countries and how their voice and their words changed, but kept some of their British linguistics. So I don't really understand it, but she wanted to see letters written by Mary Ann Archibald to her son, James Archibald. And we just happen to have them in our collection. So this on the left, you see the original 1835 letter to James. And then you see the transcription of that letter, which is what the researcher did for us. When we sent her the scans of the letters, she was kind enough to transcribe them and share them with us. The fun quote I highlighted here was about the headache that she mentioned in her last letter. If you look at the right side, she describes it as the worst cold, or rather influenza, she ever had, and suffered under it for more than 3 weeks and was so weak she could hardly move. Past another, the nights were the worst as I could not. I felt the force of the language of Job, wearisome night. So you can see letter writing was well in order in the 1830s. Now, we also have oral histories in our collection. These are not used as much as I would love them to be, but there's a variety of oral histories that have kind of been compiled through the years. In the early 90s, there was a women's oral history project where women were interviewed to kind of fill in for the idea that we didn't record women's history. That has continued into more recent years. This project that you see in front of you was done by the journalism class at the University of Scranton, and they have transcribed all of their interviews. They have given us recordings of the interviews and then a little photo of each person interviewed. The woman on the right, Marion Dunleavy, was a volunteer at the Lackawanna Historical Society for a number of years. So I wanted to make sure I included her. The one on the left, I think it's a great way if you're looking at oral histories to learn more personal histories and get some of the traditions down. And this woman does go into detail to describe what Christmas Eve dinner was like in her house. So kind of a nice primary document to have the option to review. And then we have scrapbooks. We have lots of scrapbooks, but probably our most popular collection is the music scrapbooks. These are scrapbooks of Dr. Jones, who did musical reviews from the 1870s through the 1940s. I just grabbed one page to highlight for everyone so you can see what it looks like. It's just clippings done every day on any reviews that he wrote in the paper or anything he thought had some musical connection. And luckily, there's a card index to go with these. So if you were looking for a certain performer, you could find the card index and get the date and then look up the clipping to match it. So that's a useful piece in our collection as well. And finally, I have a note about our maps. Now, this is one of my favorite maps. This is a blueprint of Hickory Grove Cemetery. It's not completely filled out, but it does give you some of the names of the folks that are buried there and where they are. So it's plotted out so you can find them, which I think is a useful tool. So I will stop sharing my screen. I'm back. And just that was just a little quick tour to give you an idea of the types of things in the collection. And I am happy to turn it over to Sarah now to give you more specific stories.
Very good. Thank you, Marianne. I will share my screen now. I have a bit of some clippings from some of our favorite research projects that we did. Let me start that. Change that. All right. What I did, I looked through some of the folders, our folders that we have from research projects that were left from others, and then I did just some general ideas of what things we do for ourselves and things we do research for others. So I kind of put some together to give you an idea of some of our favorite stories, some of the sillier ones, and there are probably more that we can't remember because they've sort of all run in together. So most of the time, if you're in the Catlin house, you'll notice that our back room looks like this photo on the bottom here, although most of the people there are no longer with us, unfortunately, except Bobby at the computer, at the scanner. But usually we do conduct most of our research in our office in the back of the house. There is a lovely looking office on display on the second floor upstairs. But when we're doing research on things in our collections, sometimes it just starts out as something kind of random that we find. It's a single one-off piece that isn't really connected to anything else. But then for whatever reason, we end up looking into it a little bit more. This is something that I pulled out, I think, trying to find something for game show questions one time for high school students. And it is the mugshot of Alex Buckus from 1933. So I did some digging to find out who Alex Buckus was and found out that he was arrested in January of 1933 for a holdup of the Duchess Underwear Company in Old Forge. He and three friends stole a car, drove the underwear company's manager off the road, held him up with revolvers, and stole $5,184. And according to police, they fled across the Morgan Highway, which seems, very old timey and Wild Westy. They ditched the car and fled. About 2 weeks later or so, Buckus and another one of his accomplices were arrested at a bar in Fort Jervis and brought back to Scranton. They were later tried with a third man, and all were found guilty. But then the story got better. They were sentenced to, I think, 8 to 16 years in the Eastern State Penitentiary. They were being held at the Lackawanna County Jail. Their trial was in October. They were supposed to be transferred on, I think, a Saturday. On a Wednesday morning, a woman from New Jersey came into the sheriff's office with a marriage license to marry Alex Buckus. He's kind of cute, why not? Felon, but cute. But she turns up with a marriage license. So there was great consternation and a kerfluffle. What do we do? The warden at the jail refused to perform the ceremony. Finally, they ended up with an alderman from West Side who was willing to perform the ceremony. They were married in the sheriff's office, I believe. They're married in the sheriff's office. The other two accomplices to the robbery were the witnesses to the wedding. And I did include their marriage license here on the bottom. And curiously, there is actually one of Marianne's favorite lines on marriage licenses. It asks if the bride or the bridegroom are imbeciles in any way. And it's clearly noted that Alex Buckus is not an imbecile. But it also asks if he was, within the last 5 years, if he was incarcerated. And it says no, because at that point, he was not actually yet incarcerated. So he seems like a lovely free man. He's listed as a laborer. They were married on, I think, on Thursday morning. He was transferred back to Lackawanna County Prison and then transferred down to Eastern State Penitentiary to begin serving his term of 8 to 16 years for robbery. I did try and look again later to see what happened after, and there is no mention of him, at least in the Scranton papers. So after, whenever he was released from Eastern State, whatever happened, if the New Jersey waitress waited for him or not, it's kind of a neat story. Started out as just a mugshot to find out what happened to him, and then there's this whole dramatic soap opera that followed that I wasn't expecting, but was great. Sometimes we do research on photos that we have in our collections. These are two of our favorites. The photos are from the Lackawanna Avenue during the 1916 Scranton semi-centennial. The smaller photo is of North Washington Avenue, the 300 block North Washington Avenue during the 1941 Parade of Progress. They're both kind of vibrant, bustling scenes. It's relatively easy now with newspapers.com to find out a little bit more about what's going on in these photos. So I included the official complete program of the semi-centennial and some articles about the Parade of Progress that was actually celebrating, I think it was 100 years of industry in Scranton, from the beginning of the ironworks and the DL&W in 1841 through 1941 for the parade, and a way to kind of boost Scranton and draw even more industry to the area. Sometimes we do research for programs that we're going to present. This is something that COVID didn't really make happen. After all, Marianne and I were planning to do a kind of suffragette debate for Marywood senior learners. And we had a great deal of fun looking for insults to hurl at each other about suffragettes. This was our introduction to the fact that there were women who opposed suffrage. The anti-suffragettes, usually referred to just as antis. I included the article on the right about the suffragettes meeting, really for the remark that I have highlighted down on the bottom. The suffragettes were, if they were so concerned, trying to encourage women to support the vote. Those who were opposing it were generally thinking that, oh, a woman's place is in the home. They had no business in politics, didn't have the understanding, to which the suffragettes responded, well, if they're so concerned about it, why don't they just stay home? So that was one of our favorites. Perhaps at some point again we'll get into a stage debate again, but a lot of times we end up doing research just for programs that we're putting on ourselves. I did a lot of research in 2018 about the 1918 Spanish flu, which turned out to be very handy when another major pandemic started. So we go down our own rabbit holes. Sometimes we do research for partners. This was a fun project I worked on probably 5 years ago for the Everhart Museum. When Neshka Pfeiffer was the curator, she had an exhibit on display about alcohol. I forget what her title of it was, but part of it was to find local connections to Prohibition. And one of our absolute favorite pieces in the entire world is the map on the right. It's actually from the 1930s, but it maps out where all the speakeasies are in the downtown. All of those little dots on the map denote speakeasies. You'll notice that most of them are clustered in an area down around Franklin Avenue and Penn Avenue, Wyoming Avenue, which where the theater district was, also conveniently where the red light district was. So these things tend to go together rather conveniently. Some of those buildings are still there. Some are long gone. Some of them are actually still bars, again, conveniently. I think the bar that used to be the Keys on the corner of Linden and Penn, it's a Gothic themed bar now, but that's on the map as a speakeasy. So some of them still exist. In the process of doing the research, I looked through the newspaper almanacs that are a great resource to kind of get the highlights of what happened every day. And I ended up with, I think, 6 or 8 pages in a 10-year span of the 1920s of different raids and shutdowns done by police during Prohibition. So Scranton was theoretically dry, but not really so much in practice. And that was great fun to do. This one, sometimes we just kind of go down our own rabbit holes, looking for a short answer and finding much more. If you remember your newsletter from last fall, Marianne had written this article about answering a quick question about the trip house that turned into her new favorite person, Mrs. Mary Shamrock, who owned the house at one point and had a deal with a shady doctor who may or may not have run a sanitarium, and there was all sorts of trouble. So newspapers.com is an excellent resource, kind of a blessing and a curse. We could find things much easier than we had been able to in the past. There is much more available, but also sometimes those things are much more fun than what we're supposed to be doing, and we get sucked in a bit, but it is fun. Most of the genealogy research that we get turns up something like this. Most people are looking for grandparents or great-grandparents who lived in the Lackawanna Valley. Most of them are coal miners. Most people start their research saying, my grandfather worked in a coal mine, do you know where? And we say, no, there were 110 of them. But most things turn up, relatively mundane, nice stories. If they lived in Scranton, we could look in city directories and come up with lists of their addresses. They may have moved every year, not uncommon with laborers. Sometimes we could find a map, we could find their house on the map, give them an idea of the neighborhood. There's not terribly much written about most people. And there's an old adage about you're doing well if you get your name in the paper twice, when you're married and when you die. And for a lot of people, that's all there is. There's not really a whole lot there. So most of our research is relatively mundane, not too much that's exciting. Sometimes we get things that are very adorable. I included this, I found this in a folder from 2016. It was a letter we got from a retired school teacher who was in Long Island, who had been telling her students about the anthracite coal mines. And she was looking for some photos to help illustrate what she was telling her students. She included a bit of her own history there. She says at the end of her letter, I'm the first college grad in the family, and I think of my grandfather's hardships to support his family. The coal dust killed him, and from a cart rolling on him. Which is again a grim but not uncommon tale in the coal region. But she was looking for a little bit of background to help illustrate her story. She's looking for photos with the Breaker Boys. So I included there's one of the photos from our collection of the Breaker Boys. A lot of times we also get photos or people who come in. They found an old bottle in the yard. And there's an old bottling company on it, from the Oliphant Bottling Company, and they want some more information about the bottler. Or sometimes there's a group photo of men with silly hats and ribbons, and it's a fraternal organization of some kind, looking for information about the Red Men or any of those old fraternal organizations that are all listed very bluntly in the city directory under the pages listing for secret societies, which I always think is ironic and delightful that they list secret societies specifically. Sometimes we get things that are almost exciting, but not quite. This letter came in from a researcher in Montana who was looking for Fred C. Morgan, who he believed was an Indian agent. And through some of his research, he had found a Fred Morgan in Scranton who was buried in the Washburn Cemetery. He was trying to connect the burial for Morgan to the Indian agent that he was researching. Unfortunately, I did find the gravestone, did find him in the city directories, found his death certificate. He was unfortunately a fairly mundane and boring coal miner, and not, alas, an Indian agent, which would have been a good story. But sometimes we help solve crimes, or sort of. This was one that we got an email from a woman working for the Department of Justice, Office of International Justice. She was working with a group in Germany. This Captain Edward Beavers, he was a pilot from Scranton who crash landed in Germany during World War II, and he was killed after he landed. Wasn't killed in the crash. He was more or less assassinated, unfortunately. And this woman from the Department of Justice 3 years ago was working with a group in Germany to prosecute the suspected Nazi who was accused of assassinating him. And they were just looking for any kind of general information about Beavers. So we found his family listed in the city directories. There were some kind of general personal notices in the newspapers about social events or parties or groups that he was involved in. They were able to send her. And this is the report of Beaver's death from the Scranton Times in 1944. So sometimes we help solve crimes. Unfortunately, I don't know what became of the Nazi. I wasn't able to find out if they ever had enough information to go to trial or not. But we hope we helped, because that was kind of a neat one. Other times, we do encourage people to do genealogy research. Sometimes there's good stories. Other times you may not find something that's quite what you thought you would. You may not like the history that you unearth. This is Marianne's history. She was doing a genealogy project for her siblings for a Christmas present a few years ago, and found a relative of her mother's who died in the Archibald jail in rather grim circumstances. He was arrested for drunk and disorderly, held overnight in the jail, tripped and fell, hit his head on a metal something in the jail cell, and bled to death before anybody noticed he was there. So sometimes you don't find nice, happy stories. You find grim, awful things. So unfortunately, that was kind of a bummer. It did go to, there was a bit of an investigation in Archibald, but then again, nothing really ever came of it. The adage about small town, no sheriff. And sometimes we find very, very fun things. This was done actually for a woman who works at the Lackawanna County Visitor Center, who was doing her own genealogy, and turned up Cuban Pirates in her genealogy. Owned a plantation in Cuba and came to the United States, and had some rather unfortunate luck. One brother killed his wife dramatically, and then 4 years later, the other brother committed suicide in his front yard by slitting his throat. There was, yeah. So sometimes there's nice stories. Other times you find things like this. There's a woman who came in who might still be our favorite researcher, who came in on Halloween. Marianne is nodding. She came in on Halloween. She was the very sweet elderly woman, had just started doing her genealogy, wasn't really familiar with the resources available online. And she very apologetically said, I need some help. I don't know if you could help me. I'm afraid that my great-grandmother murdered my great-grandfather and then killed herself. And as we got into it, we found out her entire family were murderers and thieves. One son was a robber, one other son was arrested for something else, and she just kept apologizing. She's like, I'm a nice person. We're like, no, it's okay. We know. It's all right. This happens sometimes. So in contrast to the mostly mundane coal miners that we have, sometimes we find really, really good stories. Sometimes we could tie them to the prison records that we love so much. So either way, there's all kind of stories in our archives. But unfortunately, sometimes we find absolutely nothing. Lackawanna County is the newest or the most recent county in Pennsylvania. It was formed in 1878. So any official record from the Scranton area before that time just doesn't exist. Luzerne County did not record births and deaths until 1892. So if you're looking for official records from before 1878, there isn't really that much to go on. Newspapers are a little thin on the ground. They're getting a little bit better. The Pittston papers and the Wilkes-Barre papers sometimes have Scranton news. I think the newspapers.com has Scranton papers from the 1860s, I think are the earliest papers. And then recently in the last year or so, Joe Clapatch at the Carbondale Library has done yeoman's work with newspapers.com to get early Carbondale papers included in newspapers.com. So there's some really, really great resources there. Carbondale was in the 1840s and 50s, the big city in the area. So there's a lot of kind of beginning down valley coverage in the Carbondale papers. So those are a great resource that have kind of just appeared in the last year. I know I've mentioned this before. I put it on Facebook a lot every time it happens. Coal mines did not have photo ID pass cards to get into coal mines. We have a lot of people who always want photos of their great grandfathers who worked in the coal mines in 1840. We would love to see them too. Unfortunately, they don't exist. We have a lot of records that are undigitized, unindexed. We have the DL&W coal department payroll records, which are excellent, from 1857 through 1903, I believe. And they list, they're a great resource for anyone who was a coal miner for the DL&W. Gives you kind of an idea of the pay scales for the different jobs that were performed, and the deductions that were taken out of miners' pay. Unfortunately, there are hundreds of volumes of them that are not indexed, not digitized. If you're looking for a coal miner and you want to flip through them, please do. Otherwise, there is really no easy way to narrow down that process. So we try and answer questions when we can. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work as well as we're hoping. If we can find something, we will. Otherwise, we'll make something up. We'll make up a convincing story, or we'll try and direct you to other sources. So, Marianne, I think the Genealogy Forum in July, maybe?
Yes, July 14th. On July 14th, our Genealogy Forum is going to meet here at the Catlin House in person. We are going to record it so we can also share it virtually. But what they've asked is for any one of our members that might have a question or they're stuck at a certain genealogy point and they need help, if they submit their questions to us by July 7th, that meeting will be where they try best to help answer those questions. So when we talk about our resources, this is another one of our resources. People. We have people who know how to do the research, who know how to find the answers that maybe not all of us think of. So by July 7th, if you have a question, email it to me.
Does anyone have any questions about other things that we have, or resources that we could access? There are county records online that we've gotten pretty handy with, and a few other sources that maybe we didn't mention.
Hi, this is Jim.
Marianne.
Oh,
Sorry.
hi.
Jim, did you have something?
Yeah, hi, Sarah and Marianne. It's great to
Hi, Jim.
see you, and nice to know you're doing so much. Are you still seeking family records and opening up more, files, and no bottom to that? Do you
No bottom. Yeah.
Do you digitize records for folks that want to keep their originals, but
We
still?
will. Yeah.
do that,
And
yeah.
anything anybody wants to contribute, whether they send us an email scanned version, they mail us a hard copy, they bring it in and we copy it while they're here or scan it. The more we can add to the file, the better off we are for the next person who walks in the door. So yes, Jim, thank you.
Mhm. And if you wanted to access that, would you need to come to your office, your headquarters, or is it online, for an individual family?
It's not online. What we had, well, with COVID, we've had to readjust, and it would take a lot to scan those 24 folders of fun.
Yeah. I'm not-
2,400 folders. But what we will do is if somebody has a question, if they could provide as much as they know, we'll look through the folder and try to find the missing links that they're looking for, and then scan those pages and send them. Some things have nice indexes with them. So we scan those and send the index, and they can pick and choose what they want. And we'll continue to do that. If people can't get to us, we'll send them what they need.
And let me just ask one follow-up thing to that then. I remember I was there doing research and paying a modest fee for that. Could you remind me what your fee schedule is? And, if it's just to pull out a file versus if you actually do the research yourself for someone, how does that work?
Right. And I'll be honest, we cut a lot of our fees out during COVID because we just wanted to keep people occupied. So we didn't, everything was virtual, so we didn't really charge too much for that. We were just happy that people were paying attention to us. But ordinarily, if you visit and use the library in person, it's a $5 user's fee. It is $25 for any copies you make. And then if you request,
25 cents for copies, not 25.
well, it's an EPA Gives Day, so I'm trying to up the ante. 25
I like
cents.
your style.
And $25 if you request research through the mail or an email for us to do the research for you. That's the $25 fee.
Just a flat 25?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's generous.
We like to answer questions. And we hope, what we find is people a lot of the times, like you, Jim, I think you'll come in, you'll use it, and hopefully your experience is positive, so you become a member. Or you're so impressed that you emailed us from Hawaii and we sent you a bunch of things. Oh, I'm going to send them a donation. Oh, match day is coming up. I'm going to send them a nice donation on match day. So I kind of leverage it that way, that if people are, saying, oh, it's very generous of us, I have an underhanded meaning, because I'm looking for a more permanent situation with our users and friends.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I thought the program was really nice, very interesting from beginning to end. And I just love some of the stories around some of the research you've done. And I keep thinking of this poor lady who came in to find out about her family and they were all murderers. So with that being said, I hate to see what'll happen with my family if I come in. I hope they're lovers.
Yeah. That's why we say you're never entirely sure what you're going to get when you start. And usually once, as Marianne found out, once you start researching genealogy, you get sucked in very, very easily.
This really inspired me that sometime when I have time, see if there's anything in there with my maiden name and my mother's maiden name as minors, and I don't know, maybe there is. If not, I could add something to it.
Very good.
Hopefully the truth.
Glad you told me, I'm glad you told me about the Genealogy Society. When I was young, my mother always said we had some family in Clark Summit. She never really spoke much about them, but she was one of those Ukrainian ladies that would ask 40 questions if you were dating somebody. One of them was your uncle in trouble. And I've been going through newspapers.com, and there's an uncle with the same last name in Clark Summit who had some property, who married a showgirl who went to Honolulu.
Oh, they sound
so
fun.
far he's been involved in bootlegging, and he's stolen at least 3 cars, including a military vehicle. And I know that part of the family during a reunion was from Hawaii. So I'm starting to wonder, what skeletons I have.
I don't know, but that's pretty exciting. I have to admit.
Asking my dates, did you ever have relatives and uncles in trouble? I still remember that. Obviously, nobody wanted to date you a second time.
That's colorful.
And so,
well, one of our volunteers who actually, Ted Baird, who did the program a few weeks ago on Covington Township, has been doing his own family genealogy, and turns out his wife's uncle killed Babe Ruth's father in a bar fight.
Wow. Wow.
So there's a rather nefarious claim to fame.
Oh my God. I guess it was the Wild Wild West in Northeast Pennsylvania or wherever.
Well, it probably was.
Unbelievable. But you're right. You never know where your skeletons are. But you know what? I'd like to know anyway. It'd be fun. I just hope they're not boring. Yeah. I mean, I'm the type, I don't want it boring. I want it exciting when I find out.
Alita, when I discovered it was my grandmother's brother who died in the jail cell, which was interesting because he and his buddy had been drinking together and got in a fight. And so the policeman thought, well, I'll take them into the cells and I'll let them sober up overnight. But there was no guard on duty. So they were in separate cells by themselves all night. And there's a quote in the newspaper article where David Carden says, "Oh, Bill, I'm bleeding over here." But nobody did anything about it. So he bled to death. But when I did that project, I gave the genealogies to my nephews and nieces too, who were all in college or just in their, mid 20s. And so I called it a cautionary tale. So like, if you're going to go out drinking, make sure they don't put you in your own cell.
Right. Oh my God. And this was on your uncle or great uncle?
This was my mother's uncle, my
Oh,
grandmother's
okay.
brother.
Your great uncle. Okay. Wow. Oh my God. So you have something interesting there.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
When you're at my house, maybe we'll dispense with the meeting and I'll find out all your life background, your history.
All right, as always, if you have any research questions, research projects that you're working on yourselves, if you run into a wall, if you're not sure where to find resources, please let us know. We'll be happy to help you. Next week, in the same vein of programs, next week we'll be joined by one of our members, Kathleen Halberston, who will be talking about some of what she found in her genealogy research. She's looking at a story that involves a murder, a stolen canary, and a Tam O'Shanter hat. So next week on June 18th, again at 2 o'clock, we'll be doing another genealogy feature for Lackawanna Pastimes. I hope you can join us then, and have a lovely weekend.